With R8B2, we saw the first instance of an optional objective actually being an alternate way to play the level itself. And today, with R8C1, we're going to be seeing this mechanic once again, although there's going to be a bit more to it this time around. Not only will we go through a few different zones depending on which route we take, but the enemies we face and the objective itself are almost entirely different. Happy New Year's everyone, Professor Scalar here, and welcome to the R8C1 level guide. As always, we're going to start off with your loadout, and for this level, we actually have two different loadouts we're going to be recommending. The first one being for those of you who are going for a main objective only run, since this is one of those levels where you'll want to do a main only run and then a PE run to experience everything. So for those of you going for the main objective only, you're going to want to take in with you a bio tracker, a mine deployer, and then any two sentries of your choice. Bio tracker, just the typical reason of being able to tag enemies, which there's a lot of scouts in this level, so being able to tag them will definitely be beneficial. Mine deployer will help out for the alarms in the level, as we could just shut doors and mine them, deal with a lot of enemies all at once. And then the two sentries of your choice are to give you some extra firepower and just protect you during those instances where mines might not be able to help out all that much. Doesn't really matter what type of sentries you want to take in with you, you could take burst or maybe some other ones. Completely up to you and your teammates, just again make sure you're positioning them properly depending on what type of sentry it is that you bring in with you. For those of you who are going for a prisoner efficiency run though, you're going to want to take a slightly different loadout, which would be a bio tracker, mine deployer, C-foam launcher, and then a sniper sentry. Bio tracker is a lot more important for this route because you're going to be dealing with a fair amount of shadow type enemies, so you definitely want the bio tracker for them. Mine deployer, pretty much the same thing as before. It's going to be used for some of the alarm doors in combination with the C-foam launcher. Just shut doors, mine them, C-foam them, maybe re-C-foam them a little bit here and there to just blow up a whole lot of enemies all at once. And there might also be a few other minor instances here and there in the level where we're going to want to utilize these two tools. And then lastly, when it comes to that sniper sentry, the reason why I'm recommending specifically a sniper sentry is because during the overload objective portion, we're going to have to deal with a lot of giant strikers, and the best sentry to deal with those type of enemies would be the sniper sentry as it has the highest damage of them all. Combine that with bio tracker symbiosis, and that sentry won't go through its ammunition too terribly quickly, and it'll make pretty good work of those giants and conserve a lot of your own ammunition for the other types of enemies that the sniper sentry won't really be the best against. Dropping down into level, you'll see that your main objective is to scan the Project Insight archives for a clean location. And you and your teammates are going to be starting off inside zone 241. In here, there are no enemies to deal with, but there will be resources to collect. And near the security door to zone 242, there's going to be a terminal you have to put a special command into. Once you do that, the security door will then be unlocked and you can do the full team scan tied to it and head inside 242. And upon opening up that security door, a unique mechanic is going to take place. Every so often, you're going to hear a bit of a whooshing sound effect in the background, and once you do, the fog is either going to go from fairly clear to incredibly dense, or it's going to go from incredibly dense to fairly clear. So pretty much just an on and off thing of how easily you can actually see depending on what state the fog is currently in. And in some instances, the dense fog can actually make it pretty annoying to actually do what you have to do. Aside from this fog mechanic though, throughout zone 242 there's going to be a total of 6 scouts patrolling about, your very first bulkhead key, as well as the bulkhead door control and the door to the secondary objective, and of course enemies to deal with and resources to collect. Now if you're going for a main objective only run, you're going to ignore the bulkhead door completely as you're just going to keep going to the northern end to the security door to zone 244, but for those of you who are going for a prisoner efficiency run, we need to go and do the secondary objective right now. So we're going to put the key into the door control and that will unlock the bulkhead door to zone 360, no scan or anything tied to it. And for those of you who aren't interested in listening to this part of the guide, go on ahead and jump to the timestamp you see on screen, and there we will continue to talk about the rest of the main objective. Everybody else though, we're going to be going into zone 360. And upon entering into that zone, you'll see your secondary objective is to find a specific terminal and put a command into it, and that terminal will always be located inside zone 364. As for you and your teammates inside zone 360, there's going to be a total of 2 shadow scouts patrolling about, and the only other type of enemies you can expect to see would be shadow strikers and shadow giants. And dealing with these guys, especially when the fog is in a dense state, is incredibly annoying. So you might want to be a little bit patient and wait for the fog to dissipate a bit before you actually try to go for some of these melee kills, otherwise you might walk headfirst into a shadow giant. But you're going to make your way through the zone, room by room, dealing with all the enemies, grabbing the resources, and at the far eastern end you'll find a security door to zone 361. This is just simply an open security door, no scan or anything tied to it, and inside zone 361 there's going to be one shadow scout and even more shadow enemies to deal with. And throughout the zone you'll also be able to find two more security doors, one to the east to zone 362 and one down to the south to zone 364. Now 364 is where we need to go for the terminal, but that door is locked and requires a colored keycard to open it up, which as you could probably already guess is always going to be inside a zone 362. However, that security door is going to have a class 7 mixed alarm tied to it. And as you can see with this map overlay, there are going to be shadow type enemies spawning in throughout this alarm, and there's two different locations they could possibly spawn at. So what I recommend you do is all three of the doors I've highlighted, go on ahead and shut every single one of them, and then the two that lead directly into your room, go on ahead and mine and see from both of them, because they could potentially take either one of those two doors to get to you and your teammates. And I would also say, once you're working on the scans after you finish the first few full team ones, quickly run over to one of the two doors, whichever one they're taking to get into your room first, and place your sentry down near it so it'll give you a little bit of extra firepower. And if you want to, go on ahead and re-see from that door a little bit while your teammates are working on the non-full team scans, just to keep these shadows out for as long as you possibly can. Once you're good to go though, activate the alarm, get to work on the scans, and once it's taken care of, clear out A in the shadows who are still left alive, pack up your sentry, and then you could go into zone 362. And inside zone 362, there's going to be 3 more shadow scouts patrolling about, even more shadow enemies to deal with, as well as resources of course, and the color keycard you need for 364. So once you got the keycard and any resources you need from in here, go on ahead and leave the zone, go back down to the southern end to 364 where that security door will be waiting for you, and just plug your keycard into it and open it up afterwards as there's no scan or anything tied to it. As for zone 364, there will never be any enemies in here, but there will be a lot of resources to collect, and of course there will be that terminal you have to put your command into. Now once you put the command into the terminal, a full team scan will appear, and once you finish the full team scan, your secondary objective is completed. And this will cause something to be a little bit different later on in the level, but this is only going to affect you if you go for a prisoner efficiency run. If you happen to go for the main bulkhead door later on, then completing the secondary objective actually has no effect on the level whatsoever. But at this point, you're done with the secondary objective, so it's time to backtrack out of the sector, go back to zone 242, then go to the northern end where you'll find a security door to zone 244. Now the security door to 244 is just simply going to have a checkpoint scan tied to it, so finish that scan and head on inside. And in this area, you're going to see 4 more scouts patrolling about, as well as the bulkhead doors to the main and the overload sectors. However, these 2 doors are under lockdown, so after you clear out everything inside zone 244, you're just going to want to go to the northern end to the security door to 249. This door is going to have a full team scan tied to it, and inside, no enemies, no resources whatsoever, just simply a micro drive that you can pick up, and once you do so, the terminal next to it will have 2 commands added to it that you can select from, although you can only do one of these 2 commands per run. These commands are going to unlock the bulkhead doors outside. If you put in the first one that ends with a 1, that will unlock the main bulkhead door. If you do the one that ends with a 2 at the end of it though, that will unlock the overload bulkhead door. So for those of you doing a main run, of course you're going to put in the first command and then you're going to head to the security door to zone 245. But for those of you who aren't interested in watching this portion of the guide and you just simply want some help with overload, go on ahead, jump to the timestamp that you see on screen. There we're going to talk about the bulkhead door to 369 and how to get into it. Everybody else though, like I said, we're going to the security door to 245, which is going to have a class 5 alarm tied to it. And as you can see with this map overlay, there's only one possible spawn location for these enemies, and assuming both of the doors I've highlighted are left shut, they're always going to go for this door right here, hence why I recommend you also mine it, and then just have both of your sentries on the inside of your room with you, facing towards the door to shoot at the enemies as they come in. As for this alarm, most of the enemies you deal with are just going to be regular strikers as shooters, but a few regular shadow strikers are also going to be coming in here and there, so keep an eye out for them, and BioTracker, try to tag enemies as often as you can. That way if there is a shadow, your teammates will more easily notice it. Now when it comes to zone 245, this is going to be a very big room with a lot of enemies in it, including 2 scouts patrolling about. There's also going to be a fair amount of resources and 5 different terminals, but we're not going to worry about those quite yet. Another thing you might notice is upon entering into the zone, you're going to hear security doors in the distance unlocking and automatically opening up. Those would specifically be the ones to zone 246, 247, and 248. And these 3 side zones will never have any enemies in them, but there will be a fair amount of resources you could collect, and there will also be some doors in them which will be useful for the upcoming uplinks. Because once you collect every single one of the enemies and you gather the resources you need, you'll see that your objective is to find 2 specific terminals and create uplinks with both of them. And these terminals are not regular uplinks, but rather corrupted uplinks, or more commonly known as 2-person uplinks. And as you can see with the map here, there are a few different locations enemies could spawn from. They could spawn from the northern, western, and southern zones that just opened up, but there is a door in each of those directions, so go on ahead, shut them and mine every single one of them. And then there's also some doors out to the east that you can also shut and mine. And then when it comes to you and your teammates and your sentries, how you want to set up will really differentiate depending on exactly where the 2 terminals are that you need. Of course, once you get on the first terminal, you put the uplink connect command into it, it will tell you another terminal in the room you have to go and find. And I find the easiest way to deal with this is just have 1 person on each terminal, and then 1 person defending each of those people, and then 1 sentry per group. That way, at each of the 2 terminals, you have 2 people, 1 sentry, and that should be more than enough to defend you. You can also just sort of pay attention to the room to get a good idea of roughly what direction they'll be coming from, but of course you also have BioTracker who could tag enemies every so often to make it a little bit easier on the team. Once you're good to go though, you can activate the uplink. Both of these 2-person uplinks are going to have 5 codes total you need to do. And the interesting thing about them is it seems like once you put the 4th code into the terminal and you're waiting to do the 5th one, it's going to spawn in a few giant strikers as well as a snatcher. Now, if you're really quick about getting the 5th code in, you can actually do this before the snatcher really either becomes a problem or if the giants even show up. But you do want to be a little bit cautious of them if you're slower, because if one of the uplink people gets grabbed by that snatcher, it can complicate things just a little bit. But you're going to want to get all 5 codes in as fast as you can, just dealing with the enemies as they make their way to you. And once you finish the first uplink, you just want to take some time to deal with any of the enemies who are still left alive, because the spawns should stop after you finish that uplink. Once all the enemies are dead, you can then go throughout the room, grab resources and resupply a little bit, then go to the next terminal, initiate that one, figure out where the other terminal is, and then set up your defenses however you see best fit. Once you're good to go, activate the second uplink, and same thing as the first one. 5 different codes you have to do. Once you finish the 4th one, a snatcher and a few giant strikers are going to spawn in, but once you finish the 5th one, no more enemies will spawn in for just a little bit. But shortly afterwards, an extraction alarm will be initiated, so I recommend deal with any of the enemies that are right there in your face, especially the snatcher and the giant if they are still left alive, and then you're just going to want to ignore the rest of the regular strikers and shooters and run back towards the beginning of the level, because now we need to make our way to a forward extraction point. This extraction will be found inside zone 243, which can be found at the western end of zone 242 from earlier, so run all the way back there. When you get to the security door, you can just open up, no scary thing tied to it, and then just go throughout 243 until you get to the back end of it, where you'll find the room with your extraction scan. The interesting thing though is this is the only extraction scan I believe in the entire history of this game that is actually a full team extraction. So all 4 of you will need to be present on that scan for it to gain progress. But once you get the scan to 100%, you're done and you've completed the main objective. Now, for those of you who want to go and deal with the overload objective instead of the main one, we're instead going to be going to the bulkhead door to zone 369, which is going to have a class 5 sustain alarm tied to it. And as you can see with this map overlay, there are 2 different locations enemies could spawn from and a few different doors that we could utilize. So all of the doors I have highlighted, you're going to want to make sure are shut. And then the one way down south, that's the one you are going to want to mine. And if you want to, you could also go on ahead and seafoam it. And then when it comes to the 2 that lead into your room, this one right here is the one you're going to want to mine and seafoam, as enemies are always going to take this one if that other door is also left shut. As for your sentry, you can have it facing towards either of the 2 directions, completely up to you and your teammates. For the most part, you're just going to deal with regular strikers and shooters during this alarm, but there will be a few chargers and even hybrids every so often, so be careful of them. But once you finish everything, you can pack up your sentry and then head into zone 369. Now, when it comes to this zone, there are going to be no enemies whatsoever, but there will be resources to collect, and at the far eastern end of it, you'll find the security door to 370. This door is going to be a full team scan, and inside of the zone, you want to be very cautious, because it's going to be a very big room, just like it was in the main objective route, but the enemies in here are quite a bit more devastating. There are going to be 2 regular scouts patrolling about, 1 crawling scout, and 1 nightmare scout somewhere inside of this room, as well as a lot of regular strikers and shooters. And that Nightmare Scout can be a real big pain in the butt if you don't deal with it appropriately. What I like to do is go throughout the room and deal with every single one of the enemies before I get around to deal with the Nightmare Scout, and then once he is the only thing left alive, I will go over to him, C-foam him in place because he has a lot of HP compared to pretty much any other enemy in the game, and once he is frozen in place, I will either just shoot him with my secondary guns in the tumor on the front of his chest and the back and the spinal column to kill him, or all 4 of us will just simply melee him, usually 2 to the front, 2 to the back, until you pop both of the tumors, which will kill him. Either way though, once you have killed all of the enemies throughout the zone, you can then go throughout here, look for resources and whatnot, and find out where every single terminal is located at, as there's going to be a total of 6 of them in this zone. Now, what do we have to do? Well, we're not doing uplinks like we did for the main route. Instead, we're going to be doing a timed sequence, which if you played R7D1, then you know pretty much how this is going to go down. If you have not played that level though, then this is something new to you, so I'll give a little bit of a brief explanation. So when it comes to a timed sequence, there's going to be the central main terminal in the room, and what you have to do is you go over to it, you put a specific command into it, some sort of initialization command, and when you do that, it will tell you to go and find another specific terminal. And you'll have a time limit at the top of your screen, and this is how long you have to go and actually get that terminal. While this is going on, waves of enemies are going to be spawning in. Once you get to that other terminal, you'll have to put a verification command into it, and once you do that, another timer is going to appear. This one only having about 10 seconds, and now you have to put a confirmation command back into the central main terminal. If you fail to do this, you will fail the sequence and have to do it over again. Overall, not too difficult. It's really just one person stays on the main terminal for the initial command, one person runs out to wherever the other terminal is, puts that command in, and then the person staying on the terminal puts in the final command in the main one, which will complete the sequence, and the other 2 people on the team are just simply defending against the waves of enemies. Now let's talk more about this specific one, because things are a little complicated when it comes to this instance, or at least it is for the very first sequence. See, that terminal that you need could be any of the other 5 in this room, but it could also be any of the 4 in the northern zone to 371, or any of the 3 to the east to zone 372, or any of the 4 down to the southern zone in 373. And these side zones are under lockdown until you initiate the first sequence, which means this first sequence can either be really easy to deal with or fairly difficult. So how I like to deal with this? Let's keep things simple, I suppose. I'll have one person down below on the central main terminal who initiates the whole thing. Meanwhile, the other 3 people will be up above in the middle of the room facing towards the west, as that's the only direction enemies can come from for the time being, and we're going to place down our sniper sentry facing towards that direction as well. And once the person on the main terminal knows which terminal it is that we need to go to, they just simply query it. If it's the one in 370 with you, they then ping it, and then the one person on the team quickly runs over and finds it and deal with what they have to do, while the other 2 people just simply defend. If it is not one of the terminals in the room though, then once you query it, you know which one of the 3 side zones you have to go to, and then all 4 of you together goes to that security door, does the full team scan, and then you're going to be splitting up into either 2 teams of 2 or a team of 1 and a team of 3. If you go for a 2-2 split, 2 people go back into the middle of the room and defend against the enemy spawning from the west, while the other 2 people push into that zone and start dealing with the enemies and looking for the terminal. Or if you do a 1-3 split, 1 person defends while 3 people go into the zone looking for it. This is just completely up to you and your teammates and what you're comfortable with doing. Once you make your way through the zone though, and you deal with the enemies along the way, and you find the terminal, 1 person stays there while the other 2 people backtrack and go into the main room again. 1 person helps defend while the other person goes down to the main central terminal, and once they're there, the person on the other terminal puts their command in, central person puts their command in, and that will end sequence 1 out of 3. Then you just deal with any of the enemies who are still left alive, unless if you're doing a secondary run, because there's a little bit more to it if you did secondary objective. As I mentioned earlier, it has an effect on the overload portion, which is when you finish any of the 3 sequences, multiple waves of Shadow Strikers are going to spawn in. So if you did go into secondary, once you finish the first sequence, all 4 of you need to quickly regroup again and deal with any enemies who are still left alive from the sequence itself, and then deal with the waves of shadows that are going to be spawning in. Just keep killing them off until you hear the combat music go away, and then at this point, you can then take some time before the second sequence to put yourself in a much better position. Because now that all 3 of the side zones have been unlocked, you can go into each one of them one by one and deal with all of the enemies inside of them, which will make it a whole lot easier for you to go and get the terminal for the second and the third sequence. Be careful though when clearing out these zones, because each of them have some pretty nasty threats. Zone 371 up to the north will have 1 regular scout, 1 crawling scout patrolling about, and nothing but Shadow Strikers sleeping throughout it. Zone 372 to the east will have 2 crawling scouts inside of it and nothing but regular strikers and shooters sleeping in it. And Zone 373 down to the south will have 1 crawling scout, 1 shadow scout, and a few nightmare strikers and shooters. But like I said, once you've gone throughout all 3 of them and cleared all the enemies and you've grabbed some resources, as there are plenty of resources in these side zones and you've resupplied a bit, you then can move on to the second sequence, and at this point things should be pretty easy for you, because now that everything has been opened up, you just have 2 people who stay up above in the middle who just defend the entire time, 1 person who stays on the main central terminal, and 1 person who runs out to wherever that other terminal is that you need for the current sequence. Once you finish the second one, deal with the enemies, deal with the shadows. Once everything's dead, resupply a bit, then move on to the third sequence, and once you finish that one, deal with some of the enemies and quickly run back to extraction, because of course another extraction alarm will be initiated that will spawn in a few regular strikers and shooters every so often. And with that all being said, I think the only other thing that I really want to mention when it comes to this objective, so you are fully equipped with everything you need to deal with, is that each of the 3 stages will have different type of enemies you're going to have to deal with. Specifically, stage 1 is going to be spawning in pretty much nothing but giant strikers, hence why I recommend a sniper sentry, because you're going to be killing a lot of giant strikers during this portion. Stage 2 will spawn in giant strikers, nightmare strikers and shooters, as well as some snatchers every so often. And stage 3 is going to be spawning in giant strikers, nightmare strikers and shooters, as well as a tank pretty much right off the get-go, which that tank can be a little bit annoying to deal with, but if you're really quick about getting the third sequence in, it's not all that big of a deal. Just make sure that while you're dealing with the tank, you are also keeping an eye out for the giants and the nightmares as well as the shadows, because you do not want to get pincered. This is a very big room, you have a lot of places you can maneuver about and get good angles on that tank, so as long as you stay mobile, bio trackers tagging enemies, and you're keeping your head on a swivel, you should be good. But once you have dealt with the third sequence and all of the major threats like the nightmares, giants, and the tank are dead, and you just have regular strikers and shooters, or maybe just shadows, go on ahead, pack up everything, and quickly run back to the beginning of the level, just like you did for a main run, and go over to that security door to zone 243, and same thing as before. Once you get in there, get into the final room, get on that full team extraction scan, and once you get it to 100%, you are done, and you have completed R8C1. And that's all there is to it. R8C1 is the only prisoner efficiency level in all of Rundown 8, and while it's not the most difficult level by any means, far from it compared to some of the later levels, it can still end your run very quickly with the more than sparing amount of scouts sprinkled throughout it. And don't even get me started with that Nightmare Scout. That one might go down as one of my most feared enemies throughout the entirety of GTFO. As always though, thank you for watching this video all the way to the very end. I do hope that I was able to provide you with some assistance in beating this level. If you have any tips or tricks to this level that you want to share, any questions for me, or you just have something in general that you would like to say, please do let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and if you want to join my community, there's a link to my Discord down in the description, as well as some other links you might be interested in. Among those links being one to the official GTFO merch store, which, as always, I highly recommend you check out if you're a fellow GTFO enthusiast and you're looking to pick up some sweet merch. Until next time, welcome to 2024, everyone. I wonder what this year will have in store for us as we get further into it. Hopefully some fairly decent things. And hopefully, I'll see all you wonderful people in the next video.